Imagine a country where 10 families control over 60% of the entire economy, where corporate executives convicted of crimes are routinely pardoned because the nation needs them. It might sound like a dictatorship, something like North Korea, but just below North Korea, all of this is happening. Welcome to South Korea, a modern democracy in name, but a country where business dynasties wield power that rivals the government itself, where a handful of families control everything. These families are known as chaebol, and their influence extends far beyond business into every aspect of Korean life. And in this video, we're going to take a look at how this group of families took over an entire country and became the de facto royal family of South Korea. It's 5:45 AM in Seoul, and Ji-woo's alarm buzzes on her Samsung phone. She groans, rolls over in her tiny studio apartment, and stares at the ceiling for a moment. Another day, another commute, another 12-hour shift at a job that barely covers the bills. Ji-woo is 28, lives alone, and like many in her generation, she's tired not just physically, but existentially. She did everything she was supposed to, studied hard, got a degree, landed a corporate job, but still, she feels like she's constantly falling behind. Her rent goes to a bank owned by one conglomerate. The apartment she lives in was built by another. Her electricity, her internet, her health insurance, well, that's all connected to the same circle of mega corporations that dominate every inch of Korean life. Wake up to your Samsung alarm, brush your teeth with LG products, drive your Hyundai to work, stop for gas at an SK station, buy lunch at a lot store, visit a Samsung hospital if you're sick. It's relentless, and it isn't about your loyalty to your favorite businesses. This is just life in South Korea, where escaping the reach of a select few super rich families is virtually impossible. As Ji-woo heads to the subway, she passes a young mother rushing her child to kindergarten. That kid has already been trained for Korea's brutal academic rat race, the first step to get a coveted corporate job at one of the top chaebols. And we made a video on this before, but less than 1% even ever make it here. And the payoff for succeeding is arguably not worth its while, with most companies still practicing relentless top-down hierarchies with hours so long that Koreans score some of the highest burnout and exhaustion rates of any society globally. The human cost is palpable. This is a country where people go to hospitals to inject vitamins into their bloodstream to combat burnout, nicknamed the garlic injection. Almost everything is fake here. It's the plastic surgery capital of the world, the suicide capital, and practically everyone, including Ji-woo, has seen firsthand how these rigid hierarchies infect every interaction at the workplace. Koreans call it gapjo, a colloquial term referring to the arrogant or authoritarian attitude shown by those in positions of power towards subordinates. Every day she witnesses this toxic dynamic playing out, with her friends attacked with condescending language and humiliated with public criticism. She's often forced to stay at the office until midnight doing practically nothing, just arbitrary tasks assigned by her boss. Work only for the sake of work. And many layers above Ji-woo's daily grind is where you'll find a world few outsiders truly understand. An intricate web where family dynasties have transformed South Korea into their private kingdom. The big four chaebols, Samsung, Hyundai, SK Group and LG, operate like states within a state. Samsung alone accounts for nearly 20% of South Korea's entire GDP. Add in the other major chaebols and you're looking at around 80% of the Korean stock market, all controlled by companies tracing back to a handful of families. Long-term family ownership is quite rare in other countries, where giant corporations are typically run by professional executives, who are then held accountable by independent boards or owned by a wide pool of shareholders. Samsung, controlled by the Lee family since its inception, doesn't just make your phone, they build the warships defending Korean waters, and the K9 Thunder howitzers equipping the military. They construct the apartment towers where families live and the hospitals where children are born. They even provide life insurance that pays for funerals when those lives end. And that's just one piece of Korea's corporate puzzle. One of the strange things right now with the recent TikTok ban is that you can go to any data broker's website and buy anyone's data just for a few bucks, and it's completely legal. These giant big companies with poor security are getting hacked every day, and your personal information is being sold on the dark web so spammers, scammers, and identity thieves can target you, and they face zero repercussions from it. And the problem isn't with banning TikTok, but it's that if they can do this, why don't they protect you from these similar practices? As it's on us to protect ourselves, which is why I use Aura to stay sponsor. Aura keeps you safe online by doing all of the hard work for you. They'll identify data brokers who are selling your information and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. Give Aura a few weeks and you'll stop seeing your information on these sites when you search yourself, which leads to less spam. Aura will also continuously monitor the dark web and alert you if they find your personal information is exposed. They're gonna let me know fast if anyone tries to use this information to access my credit or bank accounts. Plus, they'll also give you up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. And if you use my link aura.com/moon, you'll get 14 days for free. That will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. Hyundai evolved from a modest construction firm into a juggernaut spanning shipbuilding, automobiles, buying out companies like Boston Dynamics, the top of robotics in the world, and financial services, all under the watchful eye of the Chung family. LG's expansion from electronics into cosmetics and chemicals continues through generations of co-family leadership. Meanwhile, the Che dynasty guides SK Group's dominance of the telecommunications and energy sectors. And this is just the very tip of the iceberg. You've got POSCO dominating steel production, Hanwha diversifying from chemicals into aerospace and defense, GS running energy networks and retail chains, Lot controlling a vast retail empire from department stores to hotels, Hanjin managing transportation through Korean air and logistics operations, and Nonghyup for agriculture. Most, if not all, of Jiwoo's friends work at these exact companies. Startup businesses record a 90% failure rate, which is higher than most industrialized countries, and the self-employed class is crippled with debt. Chaebol domination is a big factor. Companies are well known for squeezing smaller companies to make their lives difficult. As one corporate research report explains, the Chaebols controlled a large share of the domestic market and often engaged in unfair business practices, such as predatory pricing, dumping, and collusion. So how did these select few families maintain such extraordinary control generation after generation? Well, the answer is through perhaps the most brilliantly engineered corporate structures in modern capitalism. Despite owning remarkably little of their companies directly, for example the Lee family holds less than 2% of Samsung Electronics, Korea's corporate dynasties wield absolute authority through cross-ownership. You see, imagine a circular web where Company A owns stakes in Company B, which invests in Company C, which then circles back to Company A. By controlling key points in this network, families amplify their influence exponentially beyond their actual investment. In Samsung's case, there are some 74 companies in the entire group. The Chaebols maintain their own distinctive internal cultures by placing absolute authority in the family chairman called Chong-soo. Power is inherited through strategic marriages and proactive restructuring to ensure inheritance remains tightly controlled. This is modern Korea, but it wasn't always this way. So to understand the situation South Korea is in 2025, we need to rewind 7 decades, as the scene there was completely unrecognizable. The Korean War has just ended, leaving the peninsula in ruins. South Korea is one of the poorest countries on earth, with a per capita GDP lower than Ghana and Sudan. Seoul is a wasteland of bombed out buildings and desperate poverty. There are almost no paved roads and most people live without electricity or running water. In this ruined country, a small textile merchant named Lee Byung-chul struggles to keep his tiny company afloat. He calls it Samsung, meaning 3 stars. It's just one of many struggling businesses in a devastated economy, barely a blip on anyone's radar. Across town, a former mechanic named Chung Ju-young runs a modest construction company called Hyundai. He personally supervises small jobs, working alongside his crew from dawn until dusk. The country has no industrial base, no natural resources, and no apparent path to prosperity. Western economists write it off as a permanent economic basket case. But then in 1961, an ambitious army general named Park Chung-hee seizes power in a military coup. Park has only one obsession: transforming Korea into an industrial powerhouse at any cost. He rounds up the country's struggling entrepreneurs, the founders of Samsung, Hyundai, and others, and makes them all an offer they just can't refuse. The government will provide them exclusive licenses, loans, protection from foreign competition, and on top of that, even guaranteed contracts. And in exchange, these businesses will follow Park's economic plans to the letter, never asking any questions. And what followed from this is perhaps the most dramatic economic transformation in modern history. In just one generation, South Korea leaps from a third world poverty-stricken hellhole to an industrial powerhouse. The elite families who cut this devil's bargain with Park become unfathomably wealthy. Their small companies morph into sprawling empires. They become the Chaebols. Chaebol itself translates roughly as wealthy clan or wealthy clique. And by the 1980s, this group are kingmakers with more power than the government itself. And perhaps the most important bit of their strategy, any politician who threatens them is promptly removed from power. one way or another, and this is continued on until the present day. So when Jiwoo is checking her phone as she waits for the elevator, you'll notice she's reading a news app owned by the Juang Group, a Samsung family media empire. The influential newspaper, multiple TV channels, and even the Korean edition of Forbes are all controlled by the same dynasty that still makes her smartphone. But as this is normal life, people just don't give them much thought. Like most Koreans, Jiwoo has grown up in this system. It's just how things are. She scrolls through her social feed and sees another chaebol scandal making headlines. Oh look, it's another corporate hair behaving abusively. These boilovers happen so often they're practically a national pastime. But perhaps few are as notorious as what happened back in December 2014, and it all took place over a bag of nuts? It was December 5th. Korean Air Flight 086 sits on the tarmac in New York's JFK Airport, preparing for takeoff to Seoul. Up in first class, Heather Cho, Korean Air's vice president for cabin service and daughter of the airline's chairman, is handed a bag of macadamia nuts by a flight attendant. The problem? Cho expected them on a plate, and what followed became international news. Cho erupted in rage, berating the flight attendant. She then summoned the cabin crew chief, Park Chang-jin, and forced him to kneel before her in apology while she repeatedly struck his knuckles with the edge of a digital tablet. Not satisfied with this display of dominance, Cho then ordered the plane, which had already begun taxiing on the runway, to return to the gate so that Park could be removed from the flight. The incident delayed departure by about 20 minutes and inconvenienced 250 passengers, all whilst being completely abusive. When the news broke, Korean Air initially defended Cho, claiming she was just performing her job duties by inspecting service standards. But as public outrage grew, the cover-up began to crumble. According to court testimony, Korean Air executives pressured the victims to downplay the incident and lie to investigators. Another first-class passenger on the flight who witnessed the incident came forward, describing how Cho had thrown the packet of nuts and physically assaulted employees. The whistleblower's account contradicted the airline's sanitized version of events. The scandal then took another turn when it was revealed that Cho had previously attacked another flight attendant in 2013 for serving improperly cooked ramen noodles. This was then also covered up by the airline, which found no wrongdoing. After intense ongoing public backlash, Cho was then sentenced to 1 year in prison for violating aviation safety laws. However, despite the severity of her actions, she only served 5 months before an appeals court suspended her sentence. In many chaebols, temper and outbursts run in the family. In 2018, just 3 years after her conviction, Cho's younger sister Emily made headlines for a similar incident, throwing a glass of water in an advertising executive's face during a meeting. Their father apologized and both sisters resigned, but they were later reinstated to executive positions in the family business. The nut rage incident, as it became known, perfectly encapsulates that Korean concept of kapcho, the arrogant, authoritarian behavior of the powerful towards those beneath them. And to be honest, this is far from the most shocking Korean corporate scandal. Later in 2018, Yang Jin-ho, the CEO of Korea Future Technology and WeDesk, was captured in a video slapping a former employee while forcing the man to kneel and beg for forgiveness. And get this, Yang ordered that the whole thing should be filmed as a souvenir. Even more disturbing, no one in the office moved. His employees just sat at their desks, eyes glued to their screens, pretending nothing was ever happening, because in that kind of work culture, raising an eyebrow could cost you your job. Once that video came out, more horror stories followed, in what can only be described as psychopathic behavior. Yang forced workers to kill live chickens at company retreats. He made his staff drink until they collapsed, then refused to let them use the bathroom. Managers were then ordered to dye their hair bright colors, bright pink, orange, red, just to entertain them. One woman was fired on the spot for not washing lettuce fast enough. He strolled around the office shooting employees with a BB gun for fun. He even ran a shady online adult content network. And that's just what we saw in public. Who knows what happened behind closed doors? But eventually the backlash grew too loud to ignore. And so in November 2018, the police finally arrested Yang and he faced a laundry list of charges: workplace abuse, sexual harassment, and animal cruelty, where he would finally receive a sentence of 7 years, modest in the circumstances. Yang's sadistic butchery of a chicken as an employee outing is an unthinkable crime whose nature is particularly serious, the court decision read. And unfortunately, sexual violence is a very common theme amongst chaebols. In another incident in 2020, DB Group chairman Kim Jong-ki was convicted of repeatedly raping his maid and sexually assaulting his secretary. The court then described his crimes merely as bad and acknowledged the compelling evidence against him. But instead of the prison sentence such crimes would normally warrant, Kim received a 30-month sentence suspended for 4 years. In effect, he walked free from the court the same day. The judge's rationale: Kim's social status as a conglomerate leader, his age of 75, and what the court described as the forgiveness of his victims, or as many allege, the bribes he offered them to shut up. But Korea's crown jewel, Samsung, has also suffered its fair share of crazy scandals, and they demonstrate how chaebols are intimately connected to the government. In January 2008, Samsung chairman Lee Kun-hee was indicated on charges of tax evasion and breach of trust. Prosecutors proved he had hidden approximately $4.5 billion in assets in secret accounts under his executives' names and used company money to buy himself luxury cars and rare artwork. The court found him guilty and sentenced him to 3 years in prison with a $109 million fine. A normal Korean citizen would have served the full sentence, but Lee's was immediately suspended, and the following year, President Lee Myung-bak granted him a special pardon. The justification? South Korea desperately needed Lee's leadership to help win the bid for the 2018 Winter Olympics. Lee returned triumphantly to Samsung, where he continued to lead until his death in 2020. And not a single day was ever spent behind bars. His son Lee Jae-young, known as Jae Lee in the West, later proved to be an apt pupil of corporate Korea's meddling behavior. In 2017, he was convicted of bribing the former president with approximately $30 million to secure government approval for a controversial merger that would tighten his control over Samsung. That would happen right after his father, the company's former chairman, had a heart attack. The evidence against him included millions sent from Samsung accounts to shell companies controlled by the president's personal friend and confidant, a businesswoman called Choi Soon-sil. The money financed, among other things, the equestrian career of Choi's daughter, including an $830,000 horse. Lee was then resultantly sentenced to 5 years in prison but served just 18 months before being released. And then in August 2022, the newly elected president granted Lee a special pardon, citing Samsung's importance to the national economy.
Considering the urgent need to overcome the national economic crisis, the government decided to maximize its efforts by pardoning carefully selected business leaders who constantly contribute to the nation's economic growth through active investments in technology and job creation.
This pardon allowed Lee to formally take over as chairman of Samsung, completing the third-generation succession of the family dynasty, all despite his criminal record. And remarkably, a poll showed that 70% of Koreans approved of the pardon, pure evidence of just how thoroughly the chaebols have convinced the public what's good for them is good for Korea. Yet ironically, it took a Samsung tablet to blow the lid off the whole corrupt system and thrust Korea's corruption to the limelight. Ji-woo still remembers every detail of that October night in 2016. There she was, slumped on her worn-out couch, exhausted, mindlessly flipping channels, when JTBC's breaking news segment made her bolt upright. The journalist has somehow gotten their hands on a discarded Samsung tablet belonging to Choi Soon-sil, former President Park's enigmatic friend who took millions in bribes. And what was on that tablet? Presidential speeches edited by Choi, classified government documents, state secrets about North Korea, and meeting notes from the presidential residence, the Blue House. The evidence was clear for all to see. This woman, with zero security clearance and zero official position, was essentially running the country from the shadows. And then there was the money trail. The chaebols Samsung Hyundai SKLG had been funneling millions into slush funds used for political bribery disguised as cultural foundations controlled by Choi. The whole game was rigged from top to bottom, and while stories like this would once remain relatively low-key, it made headlines globally. Something inside Ji-woo and thousands of other Koreans snapped. That Saturday, Ji-woo found herself doing something completely out of character, walking towards Seoul's historic center to join what would become the largest protest movement in Korean history, and it was called the Candlelight Revolution. Week after week, the crowd swelled, 45,000 by November 5th, snowballing to 260,000 by November 12th. There were grandmothers standing next to college students, office workers next to factory laborers. Families brought their children, even high schoolers showed up with their textbooks to study between chants, and by late November, nearly 2 million people were flooding the streets nationwide. These weren't your stereotypical angry mobs. Despite the freezing Korean winter, protesters were remarkably orderly, bringing candles, sharing hot tea, setting up first aid stations, and even cleaning up trash before going home. On December 3rd, an estimated 2.3 million people protested across the country, with 1.6 million in the capital alone. Even on Christmas Eve, over 500,000 still showed up with their candles, and by New Year's Eve, the cumulative number had reached an astonishing 10 million participants in a country of just 51 million people. It was clear the government couldn't ignore this tidal wave of public outrage. so they voted to impeach Park on December 9th, with 234 out of 300 lawmakers in favor, including 62 members of her own party.
In the last hour, South Korea's parliament has voted to impeach the country's President Park Geun-hye. The National Assembly motion passed by 233 votes to 56.
Protests were once unthinkable in Korea, but the Candlelight Revolution changed national sentiment towards Korea chaebols and their links to government corruption. In May 2018, hundreds of Korean Air workers staged an unprecedented demonstration against the Cho family following that infamous Nutrage saga. This boosted anti-corporate sentiments, partly because Korean air staff are considered the elite of the service industry, with jobs so coveted that families would spend fortunes on English lessons and plastic surgery to help their daughters qualify. And yet there they were in downtown Seoul, wearing Guy Fawkes masks to protect their identities while demanding the Cho family step down. Flight attendant Park Chang-jin, the man who had been forced to kneel before Heather Cho during the original Nutrage incident, was one of the protesters' leaders. Even pilots, the aristocrats of the airline industry, joined the protest. It was an astonishing act of defiance for Korea's hierarchical business culture. For a moment, Ji-woo, her friends and colleagues really believed things might change. The protests, the arrests, and a new president Moon Jae-in promising reform all felt like the start of something different, but in Korea, old habits die hard. Most of the new president's biggest corporate reform plans got stuck. Then came the trade war between the US and China, and suddenly nobody wants to risk shaking up the economy when the chaebols were the ones holding it together. It's a story Koreans have seen before, a spark of hope followed by business as usual. The president eventually did go to prison, but only served 5 years of a 24-year sentence before being pardoned. The reason? She had developed back and shoulder pain and was released for poor health. But for a lot of young Koreans, while reform sounds great, nothing ever really sticks. So instead of fighting the system, many are just finding ways to escape it, building startups, chasing international jobs, or throwing themselves into creative work that doesn't rely on corporate hierarchies. That's why the Candlelight Revolution is still so powerful and so bittersweet. Koreans showed they could bring down a president, but the real power, the chaebols, they're still standing. Even so, something did change. People found their voice, and maybe, just maybe, they won't be so afraid to use it next time.